Hello everybody, welcome back to part 5 of the Trumpeter Bismarck build, the 1/200 scale kit. And over the last 2 or 3 episodes I've been working on the hull. That's now finished except for one thing that I'll start off with at the beginning of the video once we come over to the bench. But after I've done that, I'm going to be moving on and getting the hull painted and the elements of the deck equipment that are already moulded into the Trumpeter deck. I'll paint those as well, ready for the wooden decks, which I'll probably be fitting next time in part 6. In terms of those last little jobs before I do the painting, I've forgotten to do the sounding device holes in the last episode. I should really have done it before priming the model, but I'm going to do it now before I do the underside red. Trumpeter provide a little brass template which I'll show you once I bring the camera up to the bench, and those holes for this listening device, they're like microphones really on the underside of the ship. They go both sides of the hull, so I'm going to use the Pontos template to get that done, and then we'll be able to get on and do the painting. Okay, so this is the template that Pontos provide for the listening device microphones. And it does have a German name, but I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it. Pontos marked this GHG, which is the abbreviation for the device. And Pontos just give us one of these, so obviously it's got to be reversed to do both sides of the hull. But it's quite a different pattern to the original Trumpeter pattern. And I'll do a comparison once I've drilled these out. I'll show you what the Trumpeter pattern used to look like before I filled it in. This is quite a bit more accurate. So the first thing I'm going to do is to anneal this, because it's just a bit too stiff to form around the shape of the hull, and I want it nice and tight down onto the hull side, just to make sure that I get the holes drilled correctly. So annealing will just soften it up a little bit, allow us to bend it both ways. Just let that cool down a bit. And I'll just give that a bit of a roll on this sanding sponge. Just enough to bend it. So as I did last week, I'm going to attach this template with some clear tape. And I'm actually using the position given in the anatomy of the ship drawing to position this template. I've got that slightly out of line, so I've just repositioned it. Okay, so I'm happy with the position of that. I've got a 0.5mm drill in the motor tool, and I'll get these holes drilled out now. I just want to check that I've gone through all of these holes, because if I've missed one I don't really want to have to try and match the template up again. So it's just as well to make sure that the drill's gone through all the points that we need it to. So I think that's all gone through okay. I'm just going to go back in after that sanding and just open the holes up a bit. They've got a bit clogged up, but not with the motor drill this time. Just use the same drill, just in a hand chuck. So I'll just carry on clearing these holes out, just give it a coat of primer to check it afterwards. Then I'll do the other side off camera, and at that stage I'll be ready to do the whole red on the underside. I'm going to start with the red. Okay, so I think they've come out fairly well. I've just given them a coat of primer just to cover them up, and if I do a comparison of the two, I'll put the original Trumpeter moulding in the inset box there. You can see the difference between the Pontos arrangement and the Trumpeter arrangement, which is a lot more simple, straightforward arc. So with that, that's all the work done on the hull, and I'm ready to start the painting of the undersides. Now on the hood, when I painted the hull of the hood, I started off by doing some black along the line of the boot topping, then masking that off and painting the two shades of grey for the lower and upper hull, either side of that boot topping. But I'm going to do something different this time. I'm just going to paint the underside red, mask that off on the boot topping line, paint the grey of the upper surface or the upper hull, and then I'll mask that off and finish off the boot topping. So we'll see how that goes. It might just be a bit more straightforward to do it that way. But the first step is to get the red on, and for this I'm going to be using some Tamiya acrylics. Now Tamiya's hull red, which is XF9, this one, I think is just a bit too brown. It's almost a chestnut colour. There's very little red in it, so what I've done is mixed 50-50 XF9 with XF7, which is Tamiya flat red, and that just brightens it up a little bit. It's still fairly dull and fairly brick colour, but I prefer it to the basic hull red. So I'll get the airbrush out, get the paint mixed up, and we'll get the underside done. Okay, ready to do some painting now, and I'm just using a tack cloth just to get any last bits of dust off the model. So that should be ready. I've got the paint loaded into a Harder and Steenbeck Infinity airbrush. This is my normal top coat airbrush. It's got a 0.4mm nozzle in it, and I'm spraying it about 15 psi. The compressor's set to that pressure. The paint itself, which is the mixture of the two Tamiya acrylics that I mentioned earlier, has been thinned about 50% with Tamiya's lacquer thinners, and it's the retarder type. I like to use retarder thinners with Tamiya acrylics. It just slows the drying time down a little bit. So ready to go. I'll just mask up, so obviously I'm not going to be doing any talking whilst I'm doing this. With the red on the hull drying, I just want to prepare the rudders and the A-frames or the A-brackets for the prop shafts, which are these two parts here. On the hood I fitted these before painting, but I found it very difficult to get a good coverage of the paint on the inside of the frames or these brackets, and also the shape of them caused swirling of the paint, and I got quite a grainy effect underneath on the hull side. So that's why I've decided to leave these off and paint them separately this time. So hopefully I'll get a better result. Certainly the hull at the stern is very smooth where I've just applied the paint just now. So we'll get these off and get them cleaned up, and I'll paint them along with the final coat of red on the hull. Okay, so they're all cleaned up. I'll just give those a blast of primer, and then when I come to do the next coat of red, I'll include these as well. We can probably get them fitted at that point. So I'll go ahead and put the rudders on next. Just want to do a tiny bit of detail painting on them before they go on. These strips were zinc strips. I don't know what the purpose of them was. I'm just going to pick those out with some Tamiya lacquer colour. This is metallic grey. It's a nice little detail on those. Okay, so the first thing is to get these prop shaft brackets fitted. So I'm just going to use a touch of medium CA to locate these. And I'll use the metal prop shafts to line them up. Okay, get the rudders on now, and I suspect that the shafts on these are going to be too big for the holes, so I'm going to have to enlarge them, I think. So these rudders are handed. They've got a camber on them, and they actually tilted outboard slightly. So I should be able to reach those once the model's on its base, so I think it might be better just to leave them off for the time being until I've got the masking done, and then I'll get those refitted. Okay, so I'm happy with the underside work. I'll get the model on its temporary base again, get it upright, and then we can look to masking off for the topside grey. Okay, so I've got the model back on its temporary base. I'm not going to be doing any more work on the underside, so it'll stay like that now, hopefully for the rest of the build, until I transfer it to its final baseboard. I've left the hull red to dry overnight, so it should be okay to mask it up now. And that's the next job, so I'm going to be setting a piece of masking tape at the bottom edge of the boot topping, so separating the red from the boot topping black, and then I'll apply a coat of the top surface or the top hull grey, which is slightly different to the superstructure grey. So I'll get on, we'll get that masking done and apply that topside grey. So I've measured up from the anatomy of the ship book the position of the boot topping on the hull side, and you'll remember from a previous episode that I fitted a degaussing coil using those measurements, which was a strip of styrene along the hull side, and I'm going to take that as my positioning for the boot topping. So I want a 4mm gap above the degaussing coil to reach the bottom of the boot topping. So I'm going to be using a combination of 3mm and 1mm Tamiya masking tape. I think these are fairly new on the market. The traditional 6, 10 and I think a 12 or 15mm has been around for a while, but these are quite new. So I want to mark up that 4mm gap, and then the boot topping itself is about 8mm. So I'm going to start with the 3. So I'm just going to take a length which will go all the way to the stern of the ship, and just loosely position it at the back. This has to be one of my least favourite jobs on a model ship. Okay, so I'm happy with that run. So I'll go to the back of the ship now and look forward to eyeball the line of that tape at the stern. Then I can apply a strip of 1mm tape above that to give us the 4mm. It'd be nice if I had some 4mm tape, it'd save the messing about. But I don't have any, so I'll have to make it up. Then I'll do the other side, mask off the underside with some paper, and we'll be ready for the grey. Okay, so we're all masked up now. Just make sure that the tape's properly down along the edge there. Okay, so the hull has had 2 coats of grey now, and I'm just using this very fine sanding sponge just to remove tiny little spots of dust. They are really very small, but it's worth getting rid of them at this stage before you put the final top coat on. So very gently, you don't want to be cutting through the paint, it's just to remove those little specks of dust. Obviously with a model of this size it's not possible to do the painting in the spray booth, so the dust does tend to settle a little bit more when you're doing painting out in the open. Now this last coat that I'm going to apply next is extremely thin. It's about 80% thin. It's a bit like I did for the underside. And being lacquer thinners, it just really levels things out nicely, smooths the paint out, gives a really nice finish. I've also cranked the airbrush up to about 20-25 psi for this last stage, and what I'll do is just blow fresh air through the airbrush to blow off any last bits of dust before I put down that last coat of paint. So I'll do that now, then we can leave this grey coat to dry. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to leave that to dry thoroughly again overnight before I do the next step. Okay, so I'm happy with the grey now, but I'm going to cut the video there at this point because I want to let the grey dry before I come to do the camouflage elements, so the remnants of the Baltic stripes and the bow wave as well. I need to do that next time. Once they're done, I can then do the boot topping and we'll have a completely painted hull, hopefully. So the second part of this two-part episode will be on Sunday, and I'll premiere again. So an extra video this week to try and get this hull finished. So with the rain beating down on the shed roof this afternoon, I'll leave the model to thoroughly dry overnight, and hopefully you'll join me again on Sunday to see the conclusion of painting the hull. Bye for now.